My name is David, and my wife, Sophie, and I have enjoyed a happy marriage for the past 15 years. Our family brought me incredible joy, and I truly cherished the love Sophie had shown me throughout our years together. As time went on, our bond deepened, and we were blessed with two beautiful daughters. Both of us had stable and fulfilling jobs. Sophie worked as a translator for a film studio, while I held a position as a security guard for a company. My love for Sophie was boundless, and I felt absolutely confident in her unwavering commitment to me. We were healthy, lived in a lovely house in a nice neighborhood, and overall our life felt perfect, filled with happiness. After our second daughter was born, Sophie found it challenging to lose the weight she had gained during pregnancy, but her striking blue eyes remained as captivating as ever. She preferred not to wear contact lenses, as they made it uncomfortable for her to read or work with documents. Instead, she opted for large lens glasses that seemed to accentuate the allure of her eyes, making them even more mesmerizing. My love for her stayed just as strong, and I had no doubt about her feelings for me. Our bond was obvious and undeniable. We enjoyed a joyful family life with our two wonderful daughters, and financial security was never an issue. Life felt truly fulfilling until one fateful moment changed everything. After 15 years of marriage, an unexpected incident arose, casting a shadow over the harmony we had known. In recent years, Sophie had taken up a habit of going out to parties with her female colleagues. They frequented different pubs, cycling through their favorite spots, and would meet up after work on Fridays. Sophie always assured me that these outings were simply a chance to unwind and chat. I had no objections to her spending time out with her friends. After all, I was usually home early every morning, ready to look after our daughters. On the nights when Sophie went out with her friends, I took on the evening routines. I made dinner for our girls and helped them with their homework. Taking care of them brought me a lot of joy. Sophie typically returned around 8 o'clock, allowing us to relax and enjoy the weekend as a family. Saturdays were special for us. We made a point to have dinner together, sharing laughter and stories, and it brought us all a lot of happiness. However, in recent months I began to notice a change. Sophie started coming home later than she used to on her nights out with friends. Instead of 8, she'd return closer to 10, and I could tell she had a few drinks by the time she arrived. Although I noticed, I didn't voice my concerns. After all, she still seemed to be the same caring and affectionate wife she had always been. Each time she came back, she greeted me with her familiar, radiant smile that made me want to hold her close. I convinced myself that going out was her way to relax and shake off the week's stress, and I trusted that her time with coworkers was simply for enjoyment. Even if her outings ran a bit later, I didn't see any real reason to worry. Then, a few weeks ago, I received an email on a Monday morning from someone who called himself just a friend. At first, I was tempted to delete it without reading, but curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to see what it said. The message was as follows. I happened to be at the Black Crow last Friday and saw your wife with a group of people. She seemed to be having a great time. I couldn't help but notice that she danced mostly with one particular man from her company. In case you're interested, I captured a photo on my phone. Look at it carefully, and if you still think there's nothing unusual, feel free to ignore this message. Attached to the email was a file containing a photo. I found myself wondering why someone would send such a message if there was nothing significant about it. By then, however, the message had already planted seeds of doubt in my mind, and I felt a growing sense of dread about what I was going to see. It was unsettling to think that Sophie might have been dancing with a man she'd never mentioned to me. Up until that point, I had always assumed her party companions were all female colleagues. But now, I couldn't ignore the possibility that this man had been at the Black Crow with them, perhaps as part of their group or just happened to be there. A tight knot formed in my stomach, and an uneasy feeling took hold of me. Despite my reluctance, I gave in to my curiosity and opened the attachment. When the image loaded, I noticed it was slightly off-center, as though the photographer had tried to avoid being seen. In the background, I recognized Sophie's colleagues, both men and women, seated around a long table. Although the image was a bit blurry, I could clearly make out Sophie on the dance floor to the right, wearing a beige blouse with red flowers and green leaves, paired with brown pants. It was the same outfit she'd worn the last time she went out with her friends, confirming that this photo had indeed been taken last Friday. That evening, she had come home later than usual, arriving around 10:30. She hugged me and looked at me intensely, smiling in that way I knew so well. But looking at the picture, something unsettled me. There she was on the dance floor, closely embraced by a tall young man. They were holding each other tightly, with her arms draped around his neck. I was stunned. I couldn't recall her ever dancing with me that intimately, nor could I imagine behaving that way with anyone else in public. His lower body was pressed against hers, and I could only guess at the emotions that might have stirred in him from the way they stood together. Her expression didn't reflect any discomfort. Quite the opposite. She looked genuinely pleased, suggesting her complete involvement. Seeing the look in her eyes as she met his gaze filled me with disgust. It was painful to witness my wife, the mother of our 2 daughters, so wrapped up in another man, openly displaying such affection in public. I was overwhelmed with disbelief. I knew she would never act that way with me in public. I was at a loss for why she would let a stranger behave like that with her. The question ran through my mind. Was he really a stranger? Doubts crept in, quickly snowballing into an overpowering wave that I could no longer suppress. My mind spun with visions of Sophie and other unfamiliar men, leaving me nauseous. I rushed to the bathroom and vomited, my breakfast now regrettably lost. Confused and concerned, I watched as my beloved wife, Sophie, began showing signs of behavior that seemed flirtatious, even promiscuous. Was she really involved with another man? How could she betray me and our 2 daughters like this? Questions swirled endlessly in my mind, but one kept coming back. Who was this man? I could not help but think he might be a colleague of hers. How long had this been going on right under my nose? What had driven her into such a deceitful relationship with him? Had she really betrayed me? I knew I had to get to the bottom of this and gather concrete evidence of whatever had happened. With newfound determination, I set out to learn what Sophie had been up to recently. For the next half hour, I retreated to our bathroom, trying to collect myself and clear my mind. As I sat there, my emotions churned within me. Disappointment, sorrow, anger, all of which stirred an intense desire for justice, even revenge. I felt overcome by powerful emotions that triggered conflicting reactions. One moment, I wanted to confront Sophie and unleash my frustration. The next, I wanted to pull her close and beg her to end this relationship with that man. Divorce even crossed my mind, only for thoughts of forgiveness to soon follow. Seated on the toilet, I began questioning my own sanity as these turbulent thoughts flooded my mind. Finally, I regained control over my emotions, resolving not to act on impulse. I decided it was best to observe Sophie's behavior before making any decisive moves. I realized I needed to keep my emotions in check, to look at the situation clearly before jumping to conclusions. No, I would remain patient, holding back from confronting her about what I suspected. Yet, I remained committed to uncovering the truth no matter what it took. I needed solid proof to know whether she was staying loyal or if this was merely a case of her enjoying herself a little too much. Still, I could not ignore how she had kept me in the dark about her outings with her friends. Since her workplace was only a few blocks from mine, and given that I was often away on business trips, it made it relatively easy for me to discreetly monitor her activities. So the following day, around 11:30 a.m., I parked at the far end of her office's parking lot. With the tinted windows of my company car, I was confident that I remained unseen as I watched the exit door, waiting to catch a glimpse of her. I stayed there until 1 p.m., but she never came out. I repeated this routine over the week, and finally, on Friday at 12:15 p.m., I saw her emerge with 3 others, 2 men and a woman. All 4 of them climbed into a black BMW, with Sophie sitting in the front passenger seat next to the driver. Without hesitation, I followed them. Our discreet drive led us through busy streets until we reached a high-end restaurant. I parked across the street, directly facing the entrance, and watched as they laughed and chatted their way inside. I stayed in my car, patiently waiting until they left around 2 p.m. As Sophie walked out with a tall man with blonde hair, the same man she had been dancing with in the photo I had. Their easy camaraderie struck a nerve. They seemed playful and friendly, and seeing her like this fueled my anger. They returned to her workplace together, disappearing inside. So far, Sophie had not technically done anything wrong, except perhaps neglecting to inform me of her plans. She often went out with mixed company, but the light-hearted nature of this group, two couples clearly more than just friends or co-workers, deeply troubled me. One thing that stood out was that Sophie didn't go out with her female colleagues after work that Friday. She came home around 5:15 p.m., cheerful and smiling as usual, displaying an impressive level of self-control. I resisted the urge to bombard her with questions, though I could not help but bring up her day at work and her lunch while we sat together in front of the television that evening. For a split second, she looked taken aback, but she quickly responded, claiming she had eaten a tuna sandwich she had packed that morning. A lie plain and simple, and likely the lie of someone with something to hide. Despite my frustration, I felt a powerful urge to hold her when she looked at me with those familiar blue eyes. Even though I knew she was lying, emotions stirred within me. Conflict between resentment and an intense desire to be close to her. Loving someone so deeply can bring about emotions like these. I knew I had to keep my calm and hold back from acting rashly, as I might regret it later. Instead, I chose to change the topic, telling her about my day at work, and tried to act as I normally would during the weekends. Sophie seemed unaware of the tension underlying our interactions. Even that night, we exchanged playful words twice, and she was as warm and loving as ever. We had planned to take our daughters to the zoo for a family outing, aiming to create some cherished memories. For a while, I managed to push the past week's events out of my mind, filling our day with laughter and joy. I avoided keeping tabs on her during lunch that week, focusing instead on tracking her down on Friday evening after work. By the time our daughters arrived home at 3:15 p.m. that Friday, I was there, eagerly awaiting them. I ordered pizza, ensuring they were content, and explained that I had some things to handle at the office. With their growing independence, I felt comfortable leaving them alone, reminding them to keep the doors locked. I knew they would be safely in bed by the time I returned. Without wasting time, I got into my car and headed to Sophie's workplace. Arriving just before 5 p.m. watching from a distance, I saw her car pull out of the parking lot, driving in the opposite direction from our house, clearly heading to meet her friends at a bar for an evening out. Following her wasn't difficult. A line of 6 cars between us provided a perfect cover. Along the way, I observed her Toyota blending in seamlessly with other vehicles headed for various destinations. A bar, a social event, maybe a dance hall, depending on who you asked. About 10 minutes later, I noticed her car, along with several others, pull into the lot next to an establishment called the Glass Shoe, a unique venue that was both a bar and a restaurant. To keep my distance, I parked at the far end of the lot, observing the scene from the sidelines. Once everyone entered the place, I stepped out of the car and started a slow walk around the area, hoping to gather some insight into the establishment my wife often visited. The pub was set apart from other buildings, encircled by a parking lot. Its 2 walls faced the street on a corner lot, with the remaining 2 sides bordered by a neatly cut cedar fence, about 5 feet tall, with parking spaces in front of it. I noticed a familiar black BMW from the group, the same car Sophie had taken to dinner just last Friday. It was parked prominently in front of the cedar fence, standing out from the other vehicles nearby. As I inspected the layout, I saw that the building had separate entrances for the restaurant and the bar at the rear. Both areas also had fire exits, strictly for emergencies. There was another entrance where most of the cars were parked, and another specifically leading to the bar, which Sophie's group did not use. They had gone through the restaurant entrance instead. Returning to my car, I grabbed the outfit I had prepared for this occasion. I quickly changed into a black windbreaker, put on a baseball cap, slipped on glasses to alter my look, and inserted a protective mouthpiece to adjust my face slightly, almost like a boxer's mouthguard. It made speaking and drinking difficult, but I did not mind, as I had no plans to chat or order drinks. After checking my reflection in the rearview mirror, I was confident I looked unrecognizable. I then spent another hour waiting patiently in the car before finally entering the bar. There, I spotted my wife among a group gathered near the dance floor, laughing and enjoying themselves over drinks. 6 women and 4 men made up their group, and I immediately noticed my wife sitting close to the same man she had dined with last Friday. A wave of sadness and disappointment washed over me as I felt sure there was more than friendship between them. I chose a table in the farthest corner, determined to keep my distance. From my shadowy spot, I could observe everything unfolding. The corner I picked was dimly lit and populated by a few others nursing their drinks, lost in their own worlds. I was confident no one would take any notice of me. Within minutes, music started, drawing people to the dance floor. When I glanced over, there was Sophie, dancing with the man beside her. The other men at the table shared knowing smiles as they watched the pair move together, and I realized that Sophie and this man were more than just acquaintances. It was obvious to anyone watching. Over the next few hours, the group dwindled until only Sophie, another woman, and 2 men remained. Both couples eventually found their way to the dance floor, making it evident to all that my wife and this man were romantically involved. He pulled her close, hands on her waist, and they swayed together, their bodies entwined. I saw him lean in to kiss her, whisper something in her ear, and she nodded in response. Moments later, they left the room, hand in hand. I followed them discreetly, keeping a safe distance. Out on the dark street, I watched them head to his car, hand in hand. From afar, I saw them get into the back seat, and I realized why he had parked in the last row near the cedar hedge. It provided them privacy from watchful eyes. With no other cars nearby, the hedge served as a shield, and he likely felt secure there. Curiosity clawed at me as I wondered just how far Sophie was willing to go. I moved carefully to the far side of the parking lot and slowly made my way between parked cars until I found myself next to the back of his black car. The vehicle seemed empty at first glance, but I guessed they were seated in the back, hidden in the shadows near the hedge. Believing they would not notice me from inside, I leaned cautiously toward one of the rear windows. Unfortunately, the heavily tinted windows made it impossible to see anything inside, but I could hear faint voices from within. Torn between stepping in to confront her or waiting to catch her red-handed, I found myself frozen in indecision. But just then, the car started rocking slightly in rhythm with music, and to my dismay, it was my wife's favorite song. Anger overtook me, and before I realized it, I yanked the door handle, filling the car with the light from the dome lamp. To my horror, there lay Sophie on her back, with her lover on top of her, caught in the middle of their betrayal. I took off my glasses and mouthguard, exposing my true identity. The interior light revealed me, and Sophie's eyes widened in shock. Her face transformed from delight to sheer disbelief in seconds. After a pause, she spoke, her voice trembling. "Oh my God, David, please, forgive me," she stammered. "Do not make any hasty decisions you'll regret. It meant nothing to me. Just wait for me." Without a word, I shut the door firmly and walked briskly back to my car. I drove out of the lot as Sophie chased after me, calling out, begging me to stop. Less than 5 minutes later, she arrived at home, disheveled and crying. "Oh my God, honey, I am so sorry," she pleaded. "You are the love of my life." "Sophie, I understand that I hurt you," I replied coldly. "But you broke the vows we made to each other. In 15 years, I never betrayed you. If I had known you were being unfaithful, maybe I would have looked for comfort elsewhere too. If fidelity no longer means anything in our marriage, maybe I should have sought some temporary relief myself." "David, please, just listen to me," Sophie pleaded, her voice filled with desperation. "I love you with all my heart. What I did means nothing to me. If I could turn back time and fix everything, I would. But that's impossible. You have to understand that you are my entire world. When you compare our lives with yours and our 2 daughters, it doesn't matter at all." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she struggled to contain her emotions, burying her face in her hands as if seeking salvation. Eventually, her legs gave way, and she collapsed onto the sofa, continuing to express her remorse over and over. Stop apologizing, I said firmly, my voice cold. What you did to our marriage is unforgivable. Tell me who he is and how long this has been going on. Relieved she was no longer standing right in front of me, my anger surged as I grabbed her by the neck and shook her, an unfamiliar rage taking hold. His name is Ethan, she confessed, her voice quivering. He's a colleague from the studio. This shouldn't have happened. Please believe me. I love you more than anything. But a terrible thought crossed my mind. You must admit your deception, I retorted, unable to contain my fury. You've been lying to me about your outings with friends while secretly seeing him for who knows how long. Do you really expect me to believe that you haven't been deceiving me all this time?
No, David.
Oh my God, no. This happened only recently. Please believe me. My love for you has only grown stronger over time. I'm begging you for your forgiveness and understanding, she cried, panic rising in her voice. There was no genuine love in my actions as I witnessed her tears swell again, her disheveled appearance and swollen red eyes mirroring the severity of the situation. She continued to plead for my forgiveness. No, you don't grasp the seriousness of this situation, I replied, disappointment lacing my words. Think about your colleagues who saw you with him. Think about us. Consider how others will view us if they see us together, whether on the street or at the office. This isn't just a secret affair anymore. It's an open display of betrayal. You've publicly humiliated me. I'm sorry, but I cannot bear this humiliation, and I want a divorce. My resolve to end our marriage was unwavering. David, please, I'm begging you. Forgive me. You know I can't live without you. Please reconsider. I'm genuinely asking for your forgiveness. I promise it won't happen again. Our priority right now should be saving our marriage and protecting our family. As she spoke, I stood up and turned away, needing space to contemplate our relationship. Sophie, our marriage began to unravel the moment you chose to be unfaithful. The consequences we're facing today stem from that betrayal. Suddenly, a sharp scream pierced the air, followed by sobs that struck deep within me. When I glanced back, Sophie was on the floor, her head in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. In that moment, conflicting emotions swirled within me. I wanted to comfort her, to offer solace, but my anger and feelings of betrayal held me back. I felt incapable of staying close to her, unsure if I could trust myself in her presence. In silence, I left our home and sought refuge in a hotel room for the night. Sleep eluded me. My rest was restless and hollow. By morning, I decided to inform my secretary that I would not be coming to work that day. I remained in my hotel room until noon, replaying the events of the previous night in my mind. Eventually, I worked up an appetite and dined lightly in the hotel restaurant. With a heavy heart, I made my way to the office. As I walked, I couldn't help but glance toward my house. To my dismay, I saw a green Toyota parked in front, and that unfamiliar presence heightened my anxiety. I deduced that the car belonged to Julia, Sophie's sister. It was somewhat comforting to think that, despite their unfaithful mother, my daughters could lean on their aunt for support. However, I remained oblivious to Sophie's deteriorating condition. After I left home the previous evening, she had confided in her sister over the phone, overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation and breaking down completely. Now, she was in the hospital, struggling with the aftermath of her emotional collapse. It wasn't until I arrived at the office that I learned the news. I received a call from Sophie's sister, Julia, and we had a lengthy conversation. She informed me that Sophie was in an extremely critical state, constantly in tears and filled with anxiety. What shocked me most was that less than an hour after I had left, my older daughter had reached out to Julia, telling her that Sophie was delusional and I was not home. After their conversation, Julia rushed to my house and found her sister in dire distress. Recognizing the seriousness of the situation, she called an ambulance for emergency assistance. Julia assured me she would stay at my house to care for and support my two daughters during this difficult time. She urged me strongly to visit Sophie at Santa Maria City Hospital. When our conversation ended, I was overwhelmed with shock. I realized how selfish and dismissive I had been the night before. The weight of my actions, or lack thereof, bore down on me. Did I truly choose to leave my home, abandoning my daughters and wife when they needed my support the most? Perhaps. But one thing became clear. Had I stayed with her that night, there was a disturbing possibility, however small, that my emotions could have led to cruelty in light of her betrayal. While she played a significant role in the breakdown of our marriage, I had never seen myself as someone who ignored problems or avoided facing them until the previous day. Was that what I did in this situation? Sophie and I were faced with a monumental issue, certainly a significant one, but was leaving my family when they needed me the most the only way to justify my actions? Regret and guilt overwhelmed me, deepening my sadness. Tears streamed down my face as I hid behind a table. Deep down, I wondered if there might have been another path, one of forgiveness, reconciliation, and perhaps even a distant chance to salvage what remained of our relationship. Of course, the circumstances that led us here were a result of Sophie's actions. She bore full responsibility for violating the sacred trust meant solely for me. Yet the thought of ending our marriage weighed heavily on my heart, knowing it would cause great pain to my two beloved daughters. I realized I needed to explore an alternative solution and began to contemplate the idea of forgiveness. Gradually, as I processed the shocking news of Sophie's hospitalization, I found a renewed determination. Without hesitation, I got behind the wheel and raced to the hospital, resolved to uncover the truth about her actions and understand the situation. As I stepped into the hospital, my mind was clouded with doubt. I had no clear plan or words ready for Sophie. Yet, one thing was certain. I was determined to uncover the truth. While sitting in the hospital, I reflected on a piece of wisdom my mother had once shared with me. Those who cheat will inevitably face the repercussions of their actions. This thought still echoes in my mind as I recall my wife's betrayal. Sophie and I tied the knot when she was just 20, and what had begun as a joyful marriage felt like a fairy tale. The joy of our two daughters filled our lives, and our cozy home in a lovely neighborhood represented our contentment. Financial struggles were absent, and above all, our love was unmistakable. However, everything changed when Sophie landed a job at a nearby film studio shortly after our younger daughter turned 6. With her fluency in several foreign languages, she secured a role as a film translator. Her exceptional skills as a voice translator not only impressed me but also provided us with much-needed financial stability. For 5 years, my wife thrived in her position until a new translator joined the team. This tall, charming colleague with blonde hair quickly captured everyone's attention at the studio. Despite his many admirers, he seemed completely unaware of their affection. Sharing Sophie's expertise in various foreign languages led to frequent interactions at work, and their friendship began to blossom. This, unfortunately, was where the trouble began. Love subtly crept into her heart before she could fully grasp it, leaving her confused and conflicted. It didn't take long for her to recognize that she had developed feelings for him. Initially, he treated her just like any other coworker, keeping their relationship strictly professional. But things shifted when he began participating in their bi-weekly outings. Gradually, the boundaries of their professional relationship blurred, transforming into a close friendship. They confided in each other, sharing the intricacies of their lives. Sophie never opened up to me about any of this. Before I knew it, he was a familiar face at gatherings and dinners with their female colleagues. Her first misstep was not telling me when men began joining their outings. Over time, their bond deepened into something more profound. On the dance floor, swaying to slow songs, they felt as if they were one. Meanwhile, I remained blissfully unaware of the true nature of their relationship. In a dim corner of the dance floor, Sophie found herself wrapped in his embrace, and their lips met in a kiss that transcended mere friendship. It was a kiss that shook her to her core and set off a chain of events that would alter everything. The following Friday, during one of their outings, he found a reason to pull her away from the pub, leading to an intense encounter in his car. Their desires grew stronger, and they became entangled like wild animals in the back seat. Overwhelmed by guilt upon returning home, Sophie was resolved to give me the love and affection I deserved, completely unaware that, as her husband, I deserved unwavering loyalty. Yet, due to their daily interactions at work, it became increasingly difficult for her to distance herself from him. They had become too comfortable with each other, although Sophie's love for me remained steadfast. I was willing to sacrifice everything for David because my love for him was unshakable. Sophie never intended to cause me pain through her infidelity, but she was gravely mistaken if she believed her bond with him was stronger than ours. This affair persisted for 4 long months, and now she lay in a hospital bed, divulging every detail of her betrayal. I listened, tears streaming down my face, unable to stop them. Sophie vowed to do anything to save our marriage, but I was torn, unsure if I could live with the memories of her betrayal. Still, I couldn't bring myself to voice my feelings. After all, my beloved wife was in a fragile state, both emotionally and physically, and I didn't want to add to her suffering. So, I retreated to my hotel room and reached out to my lawyer, asking him to prepare the necessary divorce papers. I was deeply concerned about how this divorce would affect Sophie's condition. I didn't want her to endure more pain, but it seemed unavoidable. While the divorce papers were being prepared, I spent quality time with my dear daughters. I didn't intend to seek custody. Instead, I hoped that Sophie and I could co-parent them, just not under the same roof. However, my plans quickly unraveled when my lawyer delivered the divorce papers to Sophie in the hospital. Her emotional state deteriorated upon learning about the divorce, and that fateful day marked a drastic turning point. She suffered a stroke when she realized I had initiated the divorce proceedings. When her doctor broke the news to me, self-loathing consumed me. I should have waited to file for divorce until Sophie had fully recovered. I spent 3 days at her side, holding her hand. Sophie's health continued to decline, and even after 2 months, she only showed slight improvement. She was left paralyzed on her left side, a heartbreaking situation for all of us. I took all the blame, but at the same time, I understood that none of this would have happened if Sophie hadn't engaged in a secret affair with her colleague. No matter how hard I tried to convince myself to stay in the same house with Sophie and our daughters, I simply couldn't do it. Each time I looked at her, I was reminded of that moment of betrayal in the car. So, I packed my things and moved into a nearby rented apartment, wanting to stay close to my beautiful daughters. As much as I didn't want it to come to this, it was Sophie herself who had turned our once happy life into chaos and suffering.